Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, September 9th, 2024, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. Apologies that we were off last week for the holiday. Things have been pretty hectic around here. I've also had some health issues and needed to take a little bit of time, but we are back and I'm very excited to dive into, no pun intended, you'll see why, this week's episode. But before we do, I do want to thank those of you who make Talk Nerdy possible. And the way that we really keep the episodes going each week is through the platform Patreon. There are going to be some changes coming up to a few things that Patreon like the ways that Patreon is operating, especially as it relates to how Apple utilizes the app. So we're going to make some announcements both on the show and directly to the patrons here in the next several weeks. Keep an ear out. And if you are one of the people affected by these changes, hopefully we'll give you ample time to make them. And you may have heard about them on other shows as well. But I do want to thank this week's top patrons. They include Anu Bhadavaj, Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Rika Maharaj, Brian Holden, David Compton, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo, Joe Wilkinson, Pasquale Gelati, and Ulrika Hagman. You and everyone else, all of the patrons, they're too numerous to list. You are the ones who make it possible for me to keep doing this show each week, to pay all of the incredible people who keep it going, including the editing firm that I use, as well as my producer and long-standing, jack of all trades assistant, Noelle Dilworth. So yeah, thank you all so much. And if you're interested in pledging, all you've got to do is visit Patreon. That's patreon.com/talknerdy. All right. So what have we got for you today? So I had the opportunity to speak with Jasmin Graham about her new book, Sharks Don't Sink: Adventures of a Rogue Shark Scientist. So Jasmin is a marine biologist specializing in ecology and evolution, especially of small-tooth sawfish and hammerhead sharks. She's won multiple awards. She hosts PBS's Sharks Unknown with Jasmin Graham, and she's also the president of MISS, M-I-S-S, Minorities in Shark Science. We're going to dig into all of that now as we speak with the author of Sharks Don't Sink: Adventures of a Rogue Shark Scientist. Here she is, Jasmin Graham. Well, Jasmin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to be talking about your new book, Sharks Don't Sink: Adventures of a Rogue Shark Scientist. So before we even really get into all of the fun stories, what does that mean? Tell me a little bit. What does it mean to be a rogue shark scientist as opposed to one on the straight and narrow?
Yeah, I would say being a rogue shark scientist is kind of taking your own path and operating outside of the traditional academic setting. So I went rogue because I honestly feel like the systems, the powers that be in science are a little bit ridiculous, toxic, and unnecessary. And so I kind of just stepped outside of that. I did love science at its core, asking questions and trying to figure out the answers. What I didn't love was the politics. And so I stepped outside of that, hoping to kind of change that and address those issues from the outside. But yeah, I kind of just do my own thing, not associated with any large bureaucratic institution or academic institution. And it's been really nice.
I love that. And I would love to hear a little bit, maybe right here at the top, about some of those frustrations and some of the ways that the work that you're doing now overcomes them. When I think about traditional academics and the traditional path, I think about ways that it is really not friendly to women, especially to Black women. But honestly, I don't think it's that healthy just for anyone. And so I'm curious what some of those, I don't know, some of those, I don't want to call them hurdles or roadblocks, but maybe roadblocks is better because that shows intent. What were some of those frustrations that you were facing?
Yeah, well, for one thing, academia is super hierarchical. There is somebody in charge, and there's a lot of metaphorically kissing the ring of the mafia of the powers that be. You have institutions that are set up where, okay, this person has tenure, therefore they can do whatever they want, which I feel like is a problem. And then there's also this idea that, oh, well, when you're going through graduate school, effectively one person is in control of whether you get that degree or not. And you have a committee, but the committee kind of follows the lead of the chair of the committee, who's usually your advisor. And so I know lots of people who have issues where their advisor just refused to give them the degree
Really?
because of whatever reason. And
Oh,
it's
that's
kind of ridiculous.
horrifying.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous that somebody could just decide that for you. Just decide, nope, actually hate you, not going to give you a degree. And so that creates situations where people feel like they have to put up with a lot of stuff that honestly they shouldn't have to be putting up with. Sexual harassment, even sexual assault, you know, even racism, um, abuse, all sorts of things. And so, what we try to do at Miss is break down that hierarchy and say, look, we're all here, we're all doing science. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what letters you have after your name. That doesn't make you more valuable than anyone else. And we're all equal partners in this. And you might have somebody with more experience. That doesn't mean they get to do whatever they want. There's still accountability. And that's the accountability that I feel like is lacking in academia. There's also this sort of publish or perish mentality where it's like, if you aren't doing the most at all times, given 110%, you're a bad scientist. And it's like, look, dudes, it's 110% is literally impossible. We're scientists. We know how math works. You cannot give 110%. That is impossible. You can't even give 100% of the time because you got to have some percentages for other things like eating and having a life and your mental health. So, those sorts of things of, well, I only value you by the number of papers you publish and the quality of the journals that those papers are in, which is just arbitrary nonsense. That doesn't have anything to do with whether somebody is doing good science or not. It's just a dumb metric that we apply. And so, with the way we challenge this at Miss is, I mean, we don't care about GPAs when we have our programs. We don't care about how many papers you've published. You don't get an extra pat on the back for, publishing a bunch of things. What we care about is, are you doing good science and are you a good person? Because we're all people and we're all interacting with each other. And I think sometimes people have this misguided idea that scientists are objective and we don't have biases and we don't have other things that other people have. Like there's this idea that scientists are better than everyone else, which is absolutely not true. I've met some really, really just dicks of people that have PhDs. It's like that did not make you, it does not make you a good person. It doesn't even make you a smart person. I've also met a lot of people that do some dumb stuff, and they have PhDs. And so none of that means anything. It's all about how do you interact with people, how do you create an environment that is conducive to learning and growth? Because learning and growth is essential to doing science. If you walk around believing that you're right all the time, I mean, we would still think that the Earth was the center of the universe if we refuse to admit that sometimes we're wrong. And so that's kind of the angle that Miss comes at is, I'm just as likely to be wrong as you are. We're on even playing field. First and foremost, do you respect other people? It doesn't matter how quote unquote good of a scientist you are by these silly metrics. You can't work with us if you aren't at your core behaving well as a person, because you're a human being first. Science is just your job. And I think sometimes we flip that and we're like, I'm a scientist and that's all of my identity. And the rest of it just kind of goes away. And it doesn't. And it's good that it doesn't, because if we don't bring our identities with us, all of this other stuff that makes us human and makes us have these different perspectives and be able to look at problems from different angles, we aren't actually going to get anywhere, because we can't be robots. We got to think for ourselves.
100%. There's so much to kind of dive into there. I think first and foremost, let's talk a little bit more about MISS. So MISS stands for Minorities in Shark Sciences. Tell me a little bit about how it was founded, who you founded it with, and what it is that you do.
MISS was founded in a really interesting way. It's actually a story of social media being good. So back in the
Who would have
day,
thought?
back in the day when Twitter was Twitter,
Yep.
before
Good old days.
Muskie took over, we had this hashtag that was called Black in Nature. And it was this celebration of Black people being outside. And it was sort of this bold proclamation that, look, Black people deserve to be outside as much as anybody else. We shouldn't be getting harassed in Central Park. We shouldn't be getting shot at while we're jogging. We should be able to exist and vibe like anyone else. And so we're scrolling through, and I posted a picture with my hashtag Black in Nature of me doing shark research, because when I'm out in nature, that's a lot of times what I'm doing. And I was scrolling, and then I saw another Black woman doing shark research in her photo. And I was like, what? Because up until this point, I was actually very convinced that I was the only Black woman doing shark science. I was the member of a scientific society. I was the only Black member of that scientific society. I was like, okay, I guess it's just me. I don't know. I guess I'll just keep going. And so to see Carly's picture was like spotting a unicorn in the wild. Like you're just walking down a field and suddenly a unicorn appears. It was pretty wild. And so then I immediately reached out to her and said, whoa, another Black girl in shark science. This is wild. And then Amani Weber Schultz chimed in and said, oh, I'm a Black girl in shark science too. And then Jada Elcock chimed in. And so now we have Carly Bohannon, we have Jada Elcock, Amani Weber Schultz, and myself. We're all getting together we took the conversation to our DMs, and we're talking, and we're kind of just, whenever you get together with your pals and you just start just like letting the tea spill.
Yeah.
So we're letting the tea spill, and we realize, wait a minute, y'all are going through the same crap that I'm going through. So this is not a me making this up, which for a long time I had been made to feel, because every time I brought something up, it was, well, I'm sure they didn't mean it that way. Well, maybe you're overreacting. I don't think that was their intention. All of these sort of things that's like, basically, I don't believe you.
Yeah. Oh, the gaslighting.
The gaslighting.
Yeah.
And so to have all these people being like, oh yeah, you randomly have white people walk up and grab your hair at conferences. Yep, me too. And I'm like, thank you. Like, that's weird, right? It's not normal. And so we're talking about that, and that's when we kind of said, hey, we should actually, start a club. We had jokingly said that on Twitter. But then got into the DMs, we were like, no, we actually should do this. We should actually get people together. This is very cathartic to be able to talk about these things and have this real talk and validate each other. And so we decided we were going to have this workshop where we were going to bring all of these people to Miami and just have just like women of color on a boat being fabulous, doing shark research, networking, sharing their research, learning new skills, and just communing together. And the very first thing that we wanted to do is to make sure that everyone had access to it that wanted it. And that meant that we needed to be able to provide airfare and transportation for everyone to get to Miami so that they could participate in this. And so we decided we're going to do a little fundraiser. And we figured about $12,000 would probably be enough to get people to Miami, because we thought to ourselves, how many people could there be, right? Spoiler, a lot. Um, and then we said, well, let's set our goal at $25,000 by the end of the year so that we can have money to do it again another year. And we have like enough money in the bank for a second year. And so we set our little goal, we made our website, we posted on social media, and then 2 weeks later, we suddenly had $35,000. And we were all like, oh, oh damn. Okay, I guess we gotta we gotta figure out something, because money is still rolling in. People are all hype. Everybody's coming out of the woodwork. And we said, well, I think this is a bigger movement than we thought it was going to be. And so we decided to create a nonprofit to be able to expand on this, because so many people were emailing us and um, sending us messages on Twitter and Instagram saying, I really needed this community. I was about to give up on shark science. Or older people that said, I wish this existed 10, 15 years ago, because maybe I would still be doing science. Maybe I wouldn't have quit. And then we had people with their kids. The kids really got me, of like people saying like, oh, we shared this Facebook post with our daughter and she's super excited and she wants to be a shark scientist too. And it was really good for her to see someone that looked like her doing this. And it was just kind of like, wow, we have done a thing. And with great power comes great responsibility, says Uncle Ben from Spider-Man. So we were like, okay, there are a lot of people that need this and they're putting their trust in us. We're going to do it and we're going to do it right. And so we started Miss. We opened for membership. That was a little over 4 years ago. Now we have 500 members representing 34 different countries and the
Wow.
majority of U.S. states and territories.
And these are all like young women of color who are either actively working as shark scientists or who are aspiring to be shark scientists.
Yeah, exactly. So we
It's
have
incredible.
all the way to high school students.
Hmm.
So we accept members as young as high school. And then we have all the way to, the rest of your career journey. So we have some mid career folks, very few because of all of the, issues that have existed. Unfortunately, very few women of color have made it past early career stage. And that is very apparent when you look at Miss and our makeup. There's maybe a handful of people that see themselves as being mid-career folks. And no late career people, which makes sense because of historically there just literally hasn't been enough time. And that's what people don't realize, is that there has not been enough time for someone to get to that point, because it was very, very recently that women started being, seen as people that you can promote. There's a lot of times people were passed over. People weren't getting tenure. I even had, when I was in school, people saying things like, oh, well, it's really hard for women to get tenure because they take breaks because they have children. Um, and so my recommendation to get tenure is to not have children. And like, you don't say that to men. Like,
No.
the men
And
get to just keep going.
Yeah, that takes me back to another point that is so salient that you made earlier, which was that this publish or perish, put everything that you have into your work. It's easy to say that when you have a wife supporting you and you have a wife raising your children, and like I'm a single woman without kids, but it's still different than having a partner who doesn't who is living to make sure that you can be successful in your career. It's a lot easier to have this traditional, I hate to even use the word traditional, historical academic career when it was built for you, when it was built for a middle to upper class white nuclear family where the man is the scientist and he is able to dedicate 8 to 14 hours a day at work, 16 hours, whatever, and be supported at home. But not only is that not the reality for most people anymore, it's never been the reality for most people of color and definitely not for women.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's very frustrating when people say things like that, or when the expectation is even before you get to that point. There are people that will not hire or recruit women into their labs because they're like, well, I'm afraid that they're going to get pregnant and leave. And they just made that decision. Like, I'm not
which
even going to
which
hire
by the
you.
way is like completely against the law, but I guess they
Yes.
can they can make up any excuse they want to. That's the problem.
Yeah, because there is no accountability for whenever, especially in academics. It's oh, well, I have all of these people that are emailing me wanting to get into my graduate lab. And I've made the decision unilaterally of who's getting in and who's not getting in. I know people who their supervisor, they're women and they wanted to hire another woman, and their supervisor said, "No, you can't hire another woman because I can't send two women out in the field together alone."
What? What? Why? I'm so
Right. I'm
confused.
like, I'm sorry, do my ovaries prevent me from doing this when there's not a penis on board? Like, what?
Are you afraid the sharks are going to follow us because we might be on our periods at the same time? Like, what is this? What year is it? Oh my God, that's so infuriating. Infuriating. And so, talk to me about that shift, that change, because the way that you talk about it, it sounds so hopeful. It sounds so smooth. But like part of the reason that people stay in academia is because they might not be well supported. They might not be supported emotionally, psychologically, or any of those other ways, but they are often financially supported, right? They publish it, they write grant applications, they have a salary, and in doing that, it gives them some freedom and flexibility. Are you struggling? Or do you feel like you're always under financial pressure? Or is this sort of crowdsourcing model the way to overcome some of that?
I think because of the way we started out, it's been it's really hard because people will ask me, like other people that are, trying to start nonprofits, and they say like, tell me how you did it. And I'm like, honestly, I'm just making shit up. I got no idea. Like, like nothing. Bold of you to assume that any of this has been planned or on purpose. I always tell people, I am falling forwards. I got out of academia, and it's I don't know how to describe it, because if you've never been at what feels like rock bottom, like you don't know what it's like to be like, you know what, I'm getting out of here. I don't know what I'm doing next, but I got to get out of here. And you leave without a plan. There was no safety net because I wasn't afraid of falling, because I was already, my hair was falling out. I like lost a ton of weight because I couldn't eat. I felt anxious all the time. I was like, this is bad. Like, if I stay doing this, I'm not going to make it. Like my health is deteriorated, everything is deteriorating. And so it was like, I got to get out of here. I don't have a plan, but the plan is not this. And so kind of just stepping off of a ledge, and it's I wouldn't even call it a leap of faith, because a leap of faith implies that like you think there's something on the other side of it. I didn't know if there was something on the other side of it, but I thought it can't be worse than this. And so that's kind of how that went. And whenever we launched and we raised all of this money, that told me, because I was thinking about leaving science entirely, but I happened to meet Carly, Amani, and Jada at just the right moment in time. And that's when I said, wait a minute, maybe there's another way to do this. Let me try that. Everything else has failed. Why the heck not? So then we launched. People were funding it. People were excited about it. People were saying, I need it. And at that point, honestly, my thought was, I might be on my way out, but let me try to tear down as many of these things as possible on my way out. So it was sort of like a kamikaze of, I might totally fail. I might end up broke and destitute and gotta go crawling back to find a place to live with my parents. But let's see how much of this system I can break down on my way to failure. It was originally where I thought if I was going. And then everyone kind of rallied. And I think that people just needed someone to strike out and go out of off the beaten path and prove that it was possible. And once that was done, everyone wanted to support us in that and support us going off and challenging the status quo. And I like to say that I think all of my power came from giving up, because people are afraid to tackle these issues because they're afraid of getting blackballed and losing their jobs and not being able to do science anymore because they got pushed out. I had already
Right.
decided to leave.
Yeah,
So
it's a
there
great
was
power
no
they
power
held
there.
over. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, so many people are under that thumb, and yeah, getting out from under that thumb, you get all of the power back. But it is scary. It's very scary, this free fall, this, gamble of financial risk, this gamble of professional risk. How do you manage those days when you are in the unknown and when you're struggling to see the bottom line and say, uh-oh, these numbers might not add up this year, or gosh, I hope we're on the right trajectory?
Yeah, I think that at first it was, okay, I will take all of this on myself. I there was no staff besides myself in the beginning. And that was very much on purpose, because I was like, if I can't make the numbers work, then that's on me, and I'm the only one that has to suffer from that financially. I don't have to worry about someone else not getting their paycheck. And for me, fortunately, I did have some cushion, because I didn't have any debt, because I went to college debt free, because I got a scholarship, and my car was paid off. So I was like, cool, creditors won't come after me.
Right.
Worst case scenario, I sell my house and I go live at home. It's just me and a dog. I just have to feed myself and my dog. I don't have a family, and so in that way, I was very flexible, where I could take the risk, because it wasn't going to totally wreck me. Like, there was never a risk of me being homeless. I do have parents that do have a spare bedroom that I could go back to if I needed to. Um, and so that is something that I could do. And I feel like not everyone can do that. And so since I could, I said, well, let's see. It's a great experiment. And I'll take all of the risk on. And I will run Miss. And it wasn't until I felt like, oh, yes, money is consistently coming in. I feel very confident that if I bring other people into this, I will be able to take care of them. And they are not assuming any risk by jumping on board, that we started bringing in other people. Now, when it was just me, I was wearing a lot of hats. I was
Yeah.
learning as I went. I didn't know anything about money management of grants, because at universities you have someone that does that for you. There's
Yeah,
usually
they don't
at
teach you
least a
that.
person.
Yeah.
There's usually a person, or even depending on the size of the institution, a whole department of people that handle grant funds and make sure you got the reports done and make sure that everything is filed under the right grant and all of that stuff. I had to do all of that myself. Writing the grants, uh, organizing the money, making sure that our programs, like we had all of the liability insurance and all of these things that other people, there's usually someone else that's their job. It's usually not the job of the scientist to figure out. And so that was hard, but now I know it, and I feel like I know a lot of things about how entities operate, which I feel like is a strength, that I know the ins and outs of pretty much every person's job at a university now, because I've had to do them all.
That's incredible. And I'm curious because, right, patriarchy, white supremacy, that doesn't stop at the door of the university. These are systemic problems, right? They're across all institutions. And so even leaving these traditional walls where it's so overt, where the pipeline leaks so much, where yes, we're seeing so many brilliant women of color at the bachelor's level and fewer at the master's and even fewer at the doctorate. And there's like, very few when we're looking at tenured professors and even administration. But still, navigating, applying for grants, navigating these large kind of, let's say, government institutions, operating and doing science in a world where women, and especially Black women, are often, you know, undervalued, under not just undervalued. God, there's like a million words that we can fill in here, but people might not take you seriously. People might make assumptions about you. How do you navigate? I mean, do you find that it's a big difference now that you've left academia, that you're running into it less, or it's just different?
I run into it less at the personal level.
Right.
Like
Okay.
when I was in academia, I had to deal with people making microaggressions and macroaggressions like directly to my face.
Right. So all day
And
you're carrying that psychological burden of people being cruel to you, even without, like, even when it's an implicit bias, even when they think they're being nice to you, they're being cruel.
yeah, exactly. And so now it's more like the systemic level, which is still frustrating, but it's not something that I'm encountering every single day. So, I get a grant back, um, and the reviewers say something ridiculous, like, "Oh, we don't think that this person has, the experience or the expertise, or that we don't think this institution can handle this, as Miss being a small grassroots organization." And occasionally I have the face-to-face interactions where I'm talking to grant officers and they say, "Well, have you thought about partnering with a larger institution?" And then
Right.
they name some like white guy that I should partner with and have my grants go through him. And I'm like,
Jesus.
I'm sorry. No. Despite what you think, I am actually capable of doing what I say that I'm doing. But they're like, I don't know. You don't have a penis or a PhD. I don't know. I don't know if we can trust you. And so then at that point, I kind of just, you know, I will hound and hound and hound and say things, and I'm very vocal about problems. I remember one time I gave a talk at a conference about some of my like social science research about why retention of Black, Indigenous people of color is so low in marine science. And, you know, one of the things that I said is a lot of people left the field of marine science because they had terrible research experiences as undergraduates. They either didn't have mentors, or worse, they had mentors that abused them or mistreated them, or they had an incident that happened and nobody stuck up for them. And I had somebody from the National Science Foundation, they raised their hand and they asked a question, and they were like, well, I mean, this is very concerning because I'm the program manager for some REU programs. And were these REUs? And I just looked at her and goes, yeah, all of them. And she was like, what? This just doesn't make sense. And I'm like, it doesn't it? Because you don't have any way that you check on REU students. There's no way that they can report something if it happens to NSF. They have to report it to the institution, and the institution just sweeps it under the rug because if they admit that something happened at their REU, there's a chance that their funding for their REU might be taken away.
Of
So
course.
there's no reason for them to report an incident.
Yeah, and these incidents, clearly racism, sexism, it's a bad look, right? And so it always blows my mind when the way to avoid the bad look is not reform, but covering up the bad thing. Like it looks bad when an overt act of racism or sexism or violence even occurs. How do you fix that? You punish the people, you change the culture, you reform, you do better. But no, so often the answer is minimize, cover up, sweep under the rug, maybe one or two, fire one or two people sort of that nobody will notice and say we've now changed, but then continue on with the status quo. It's
And they never
infuriating.
actually fire them.
I know
Like,
they put them on like paid leave, and I'm like, that sounds great.
They'll be like, oh, this person has decided to step down, and
Yeah, right.
and that reflects, so you go to apply, that person goes to apply to another institution, and it doesn't show that they got fired. It shows that they left. And that's very different. And that's why we have people, in the rare instances that people are removed from institutions, it's done in a way that they can just go to another institution and go and abuse the same, the same way that they were, because there's no accountability to be like, oh no, I fired this person. It's, oh, they left. They've decided to pursue other opportunities.
It's infuriating when we see systems that are so incredibly damaging. And I love that the ownership that you take of it wasn't working, so I left and I started to model something that should work, that will work. And maybe this modeling will end up having, I mean, obviously it has an effect for, as you mentioned, like 500 of these incredible young women, but also maybe downstream it will affect these institutions. But why should you have to be the martyr that says, I'm going to continue to be abused in order to prove a point? I'm going to change the system from the inside. It's always like a great fucking tagline in a movie, but ultimately the personal cost of just taking it and then trying to fight back within the institution and getting it 2 and 3 times over. Why is it that we glorify that so much? And somehow there's this I don't know, there's this stigma around saying, I left. It's not because I, quote, couldn't cut it. It's because I don't want to live like that. Why would I want to live like that?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of quitting. I
I
tell
love
everyone,
that.
like, there is no shame in quitting. Like, you
I,
should never feel bad about deciding this isn't for me.
And do you think that the culture, I mean, obviously, I think that our culture is becoming even more and more bifurcated. So you've got like the rugged individualism, sort of manifest destiny, awful supremacist, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps culture that's just getting more and more dug in. But let's say at least on the progressive side, you know, I think about the Olympics and I think about Simone Biles and I think about how, yes, there are always people who are like, she was a quitter. But there is a whole growing movement of people going like, how brave to prioritize your well-being over a piece of metal, over glory, over some pressure, this like arbitrary thing. Like that is a massive culture shift, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that I really try to elevate when people talk to me, especially people that are earlier in their careers than me, and they're asking, well, what do I do if I'm having this situation? You know, what do I do if I'm having an issue where I'm facing racism or sexual harassment in my workplace? And the thing that I always tell them is that in science, people will have you believe that abuse is just the cost of doing business. And that is not true. Like, science should not cost you your well being. Science should not cost you your health or security or safety. That is not the cost of doing science. And if someone is asking you to pay that cost is too high.
And it's also
And
not the only way to do it.
yeah, and people will I've hear this time and time again, almost this literal phrase, which is, well, if you can't cut it, there's a whole line of people behind you waiting for a spot. And it's this idea that, oh, this is so competitive, everyone wants to do it. So if you aren't willing to work for free, someone is. If you aren't willing to put up with your advisor groping you, someone is. You know, that's the attitude that is pervasive. And trying to break that is effectively just telling people over and over and over again that you don't have to take this. There are people and places where you can go and work, where you can feel safe and where you can have work life balance. And even just presenting that as an option makes other institutions have to adapt. Because, I mean, we've had situations where, you know, we have a program and our program stipend is $5,000, and there's another program that's very similar to ours and they're not paying. And people go, well, why the heck would I do your program when I could go do a Miss program where I'm going to get paid? And then
Yeah,
they're like, oh no, Miss is taking all of our people.
right. Yeah.
And they're like, well, I guess we should start paying people. And even at the level of when people ask us to advertise jobs within our network, I mean, we have a huge network of people who are really fantastic and amazing. And you could, if you get your job in front of those people, you get a huge boost to applicants. And so people will say, "Oh, can you post this internship? Can you post this job opportunity?" And we actually have a rule where we will not share anything where the salary or stipend is not clearly outlined in the description. And we'll ask people, you know, oh, okay, so what's the salary range for this position? And they respond with, oh, well, we don't share salary ranges. And then I will say, literally, the only benefit to doing that is so that you can underpay people. And it's a known fact that when you are expecting someone to negotiate, women and people of color are treated differently in negotiations. And that's how we have pay disparages. So tell me what the salary range is so that people know. And if you're just going to arbitrarily pick a salary, I'm going to tell you that our members will lose out in that. So why would I advertise that job to them?
Yeah. It's really facilitating, I think, a massive culture shift, which has been so necessary, which I've advocated for a long time in my training and my psychom work, which is talk about money with your peers. Do not allow this cultural pressure, which was, ooh, it's tacky, ooh, it's uncomfortable, ooh, it's whatever. Those were all just approaches to keep you underpaid.
Yep,
Talking with
exactly.
your peers about money is the way to make sure that the money is fair and
Mm-hmm.
a way to make sure that you're getting paid what you're worth. But it's hard for a lot of people. A lot
It
of people
is.
really struggle with that because we've been trained our entire lives to feel shame around that.
Yeah, and one of the things that we do at all of our programs for Miss is we have this real talk session where people can ask us anything that they want. And we say there's nothing that's off limits here. If you want to ask me how much I make, if you want to ask me about my experiences with this person, I'm going to be honest with you, because I think that like you say, if you're not talking about it, that's how people abuse and neglect certain people, because they know that they don't have a network of people to tell them what their value is. And so one of the things that we did very early on, because we had a partnership with National Geographic, to get more diversity on the shark shows. And the first thing that we did is we pulled together a standard appearance waiver for all of our members. We based it off of the people that I know that are very much involved in documentaries and things like that. I talked to producers about what are the best appearance waivers that they've ever seen, what points does it have on it, and then we put an actual expected um, pay rate based on experience for our members. And that was based on me literally reaching out to everyone I could find, because I have no shame, reaching out to everyone I could find on Twitter or on the internet and somewhere that had been on a show, and asked them what their going rate is for their shows. And I set it at the rate that white men are paid.
100%.
because
Yep.
because there was a huge disparity, like to the point where some people, like women of color, were doing shows for $500, and there was a white man on that same show getting $5,000.
Yep. Yeah, this doesn't surprise me. I worked as a television host for probably 15 years, and we got to the point with my thank goodness for my agent being such a bulldog. Well, we got to the point where I didn't want to do shows unless they were favored nations, right? Unless there was just in the contract that all of the people who have the same role get paid the same amount of money. That's just how it works. I'm doing the same job as this person. We need transparency here. It's a dangerous game, and it's been played for so long, and we very often have been on the shit end of the stick of this game. And when I say we, I'm a white woman. I have like inordinate privilege even beyond. And so, I can commiserate with other women, but we've all seen the studies over and over. Like you mentioned negotiation earlier, the kind of classic studies from the 70s or 80s where a white man, a white woman, a black man, a black woman go to negotiate for the price of a car. And they net out the same every time. White men pay the least, then black men, then white women, then black women. Black women get the shit end of the stick culturally, not culturally, institutionally, across the board. And the work that you're doing is so fucking important. And you know that. You don't need me to say that to you. But it is so important. And I'm so grateful for people like you who, like you said, you don't have any shame and you're willing to really just push, 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 because that's what it takes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that another thing that I always like to point out to people is that I'm doing this because I want to. I'm fighting the system because I want to. And I always remind people that the expectation is not for you to fight. It is not your job to fix other people's mess. And I've taken this on because I feel passionate about it and it is my calling to do. And I always tell all of the members that if you feel compelled to do that, then go for it. Absolutely. If it brings you joy to tear down systems in the same way that it does me, then you should do that. If it doesn't and it's stressful, just do your job. Your job is to be a scientist. You don't owe anyone anything. You don't owe them your blood, your sweat, your tears. Slavery is over. We are done with that. Like, you don't owe people anything. You did not break the system. You're not in charge of fixing it. So that's what I tell people is that all of this is really a distraction. The systems are set up on purpose to exclude certain people, and they know that by fighting the system, you are going to do less. You're going to do less science. You're going to do less of other things because you're focused on this. And so I always tell people that, like, you should just do science if that's what you want to do. The other co-founders of MISS, they are Rest is Resistance. They are doing science. I have decided that I am going to come on staff and I am going to work for MISS. They are still doing their science, still on their trajectory, and they are not in the trenches with me. And we need people on both sides. We need people that are refusing to play ball and going and doing the work, their research, and that is a super valid approach to say, no, I'm not going to let you distract me with this. I'm going to just keep doing science. I have decided to step off of that path, and I still do science. I don't do it as much as if I had just, totally focused on science, but that I'm feeling fulfilled in what I'm doing, and that's why I'm doing it. And so I always think it's really important to share that message, because I think sometimes with Black women, we're like put on a pedestal if we spend our lives fighting, and Black women are just as valuable not fighting,
100%.
doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Absolutely. I think, like, as we're a bit low on time, but we haven't gotten to it yet, this is a really good pivot point. Speaking of the science, I would just love to hear from you maybe in these last few minutes. What is it about sharks? What is it about this marine science that you are so passionate about, that kind of drew you to it originally and that has kept it in your heart and your mind?
I mean, sharks are just dope. Like, they're super old. They've been on this planet for 450 million years. They were here before dinosaurs, before trees, before Saturn got its rings. Like, they're here for the long haul. And what's really cool is in all that time, they haven't changed all that much.
Mm-hmm.
They've had little changes, they've adapted. But, like, if you saw a shark 450 million years ago, you would be like, that's a shark.
Right.
Unlike, other animals where, like, everything is sort of evolving to be a crab. They just like become crabs. And like dinosaurs, where the closest living relative to a dinosaur is a chicken, and you're like, what? How? What?
Right.
But sharks are like, that's a shark. That's still a shark. That's still a shark. It's a shark. So I think that's really cool. But also I'm driven by this importance that they have in the ecosystem that's just really overlooked because of how much people fear and mistrust sharks. And so I really just want sharks to have better PR people, and I've decided that that's me. So that's what I'm really interested in, is like the ecology and evolution of sharks. Like, what role do they play? How did they evolve to do those roles? How are they going to evolve as our oceans are changing, largely because of human activity? Like, who's going to be sharks that we need to watch out for because they're going to face greater threats, who's doing okay, the sharks that we are losing at an alarming rate, what's going to happen when they're gone, what ecosystem service are they providing that's about to be removed, because I like to know before the Jenga tower falls, like what is
Right.
the piece that we should not let be taken out. So that's really what I'm passionate about with the sharks, and I love doing research. I love doing policy and conservation work. I love doing science education. I wear a lot of different hats, but that's what I love. I love to see the research all the way through, do the research, share that research with policymakers, see it affect policy, and educate people about it as well. I just love that. And I love my job. I love being rogue. It's the best decision I ever made. Even on the days where I'm like, why did I do this? I'm like, cause you love it, you dummy. And I just kind of like get up out of bed and I go keep doing it because I'm really happy doing it.
Well, and isn't that really the crux of all of this, right? Like, there are so many topics that we've covered in this hour. There's so many different aspects of your work that we've been able to discuss. There's so much left unsaid. There's so much in the book that we obviously did not get to. But ultimately, I mean, isn't the point to enjoy ourselves, to have passion, to find meaning, to find purpose, to love what we do, and to not intentionally or maybe unintentionally find ourselves in these positions where we are, I mean, life is suffering. We're all going to suffer. It's a terrible thing. Things always happen that are out of our control. And there are systems in place that cause suffering. But if we have the opportunity to maximize that joy, isn't that kind of the whole point of everything?
Yeah. I always say my two goals in life are to be happy and to leave the world better than I found it. And I think I'm achieving that.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would say achieving. I think probably, I hope we don't lose you tomorrow, but if we did lose you tomorrow, I think you will have achieved that. And that's really incredible, especially being, I don't know, so young, so kind of at a pinnacle in your career, having so much more to do. You've already done so much. And I just want to thank you for, putting this all on paper, which is not an easy task in and of itself, so that you can share these ideas with us. But B, just all of the incredible work that you've done throughout your career and taking the time with us today to share it with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, of course. Everybody, the book is Sharks Don't Sink, Adventures of a Rogue Shark Scientist by Jasmin Graham. And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.